Aunt spent $100,000 on her dog's spa treatment, but refused to save my son's life. Now she's begging me for a favor. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Aunt Sandra's penthouse, casting a golden glow over her marble floors. Her poodle, Duchess, lounged on a custom velvet couch that probably cost more than my car. I sat across from her, clutching a folder of medical documents so tightly my knuckles had turned white. "You're irresponsible and naive," my Aunt Sandra said, sipping champagne from a crystal flute while examining me with cold eyes. "Always have been, always will be." The words stung, but they weren't unfamiliar. Growing up as the daughter of Sandra's younger sister, the one who married beneath her, I was constantly reminded that I was the family embarrassment. My mother had fallen in love with a struggling musician instead of the attorney my grandparents had approved of. When she died giving birth to me, and my father spiraled into depression, Aunt Sandra never let me forget that my very existence was the result of poor decision-making. "I wouldn't be here if I had any other option," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Liam needs the surgery. The doctors say without it." "Oh, please." Sandra waved her manicured hand dismissively. "There's always some drama with you, Jennifer. First it was college tuition, then it was that business venture that predictably failed, and now it's your son." She emphasized the word son, as if it were something distasteful. "Having a child when you can barely support yourself. What did you expect would happen?" What I expected was basic human decency from my only living relative, but I swallowed the bitter retort rising in my throat. Liam's life was worth more than my pride. Duchess barked, and Sandra immediately cooed, rushing to the dog's side with a hand-baked organic treat shipped weekly from some exclusive pet bakery in Switzerland. "Is my precious baby hungry? Did mommy neglect you for too long?" She kissed the dog's head before glaring at me. "See how responsibly I take care of my dependent? I would never put Duchess in a position where I couldn't afford her medical care." I watched in silent disgust as she adjusted the diamond-studded collar around the poodle's neck. 3 years ago, when Sandra had turned 50 and remained defiantly childless, she'd thrown a canine cotillion for Duchess that made the society pages. 200 guests, a dog-friendly cake that cost $5,000, and party favors that included paw-print-shaped platinum charms from Tiffany's. Meanwhile, I'd been working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide to pay rent and put food on the table for my son. "Sandra, please." I tried again, opening the folder to show her the doctor's report. "Liam has a congenital heart defect. Without this surgery, he won't see his 8th birthday. The procedure costs $86,000, and insurance will only cover a fraction. I've sold everything I own, taken out loans, started fundraisers, but I'm still short. I can pay you back, I swear." She barely glanced at the papers, more concerned with a small spot of dirt on Duchess's paw. "And how exactly would you pay me back? With your meager salary? Don't be ridiculous." She stood up and walked to her bar cart, refilling her champagne. "You know, this is exactly what Mother always warned about. Your impulsiveness, your failure to plan. Did you even know about this condition before you had him?" The implication that I should have terminated my pregnancy if I'd known about Liam's heart condition sent a wave of rage through me. I pictured my beautiful boy with his father's dark curls and my green eyes, currently in a hospital bed hooked up to monitors, still somehow managing to smile when nurses came to check on him. Yes, I knew. I lied, wanting to hurt her. And I chose to have him anyway, because some of us value human life over designer handbags and diamond-encrusted dog collars. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't take that tone with me when you're here begging for handouts. I work hard for my money." Working hard, in Sandra's world, meant marrying her college sweetheart Gregory, whose family owned half the real estate in our city, and then divorcing him 10 years later with a settlement that ensured she'd never have to work a day in her life. After that, she'd launched a career as a socialite and self-proclaimed dog accessory designer, though everyone knew her assistants did all the actual work. "I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for help to save my son's life," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "He's your great-nephew, your only family besides me. Blood doesn't automatically entitle you to my money," she sniffed, adjusting her Cartier bracelet. Besides, I simply can't afford it right now. Duchess is scheduled for her quarterly spa retreat in Paris next week. We're flying private, of course, and I've just invested in expanding my luxury pet accessories line. I stared at her in disbelief. The woman lived in a 4,000 square foot penthouse with artwork worth millions on the walls. Her walk-in closet was the size of my entire apartment. She couldn't afford to save her great-nephew's life, but could afford to fly her dog to Paris on a private jet? How much is the dog spa costing you? I asked quietly. She looked annoyed at the question. That's hardly your business, but if you must know, the full treatment package, accommodations at the pet-friendly suite at the Ritz, and the shopping I plan to do, while we're there, will probably come to around $100,000. But that's different. Duchess deserves the best. She's my emotional support animal and a crucial part of my brand image. Something inside me broke at that moment. The last thread of hope I'd been desperately clinging to snapped. I slowly gathered the medical documents and stood up. I understand, I said, my voice hollow. Thank you for your time. Oh, don't look so melodramatic. Have you tried one of those online fundraisers? I hear they work wonders for people in your situation. She was already looking at her phone, having dismissed me mentally before I'd even left. Just don't tag me in any social media posts about it. I don't want my followers thinking I endorse financial irresponsibility. I walked to the elevator, my legs feeling like lead. As the doors were closing, I heard her cooing to Duchess again. Don't worry, baby. Mommy would never let anything happen to you. Not like some people who can't take proper care of their responsibilities. The next morning, I scrolled through my phone mindlessly while sitting beside Liam's hospital bed. He was still sleeping, the medication making him drowsy. A notification popped up. Sandra had posted on her Instagram. With numb fingers, I tapped on it. There she was, boarding a private jet with Duchess in a custom-made carrier that matched her Hermes luggage. The caption read, "Paris bound. My little princess deserves only the best spa treatments. #dogmom, #luxury travel, #bless life." The comment section was full of her wealthy friends gushing over how amazing she was for treating her dog so well. One even wrote, "You're the most generous, caring soul I know, Sandra. Duchess is so lucky to have you." I looked at my son's pale face, at the tubes connecting him to machines, at his chest rising and falling with each precious breath. Then I looked back at the phone, at the woman who had $100,000 to spend on dog spa treatments, but couldn't spare a dime to save her own great-nephew's life. That was the moment I truly understood what it meant to hate someone with every fiber of your being. 3 days after Sandra left for Paris, her sister-in-law called to check if I'd sorted things out. When I told her what happened, she offered to organize a small fundraiser among their social circle. "I don't need your pity," I told her. But the truth was, I had nothing left to sell. My apartment was already stripped bare of anything valuable. My wedding ring, the vintage guitar my father had left me, even the small gold locket with my mother's picture, all gone. The hospital bills kept mounting, and Liam's condition was worsening by the day. His skin had taken on a bluish tint, and he tired from the smallest exertion. The doctor's expressions grew grimmer with each visit. I approached every bank in the city, but with my credit score and income, no one would give me a loan of that size. I even begged my boss for an advance, only to be told that the clinic was already struggling financially. Friends contributed what they could, but most were in similar financial situations, hardworking people living paycheck to paycheck. At night, when Liam finally fell asleep, I would step into the hospital bathroom and silently break down, careful not to let him hear my sobs. I couldn't let him see me falter, not when he was fighting so hard. During one of those moments, curled up on the cold tile floor, I received an email notification. Desperate for any distraction, I opened it to find a message from a small medical technology blog seeking freelance writers with healthcare experience. The pay was minimal, but it was something. That night, I began writing medical content during Liam's sleeping hours. I'd work from 9 p.m. until 5 a.m., catch 2 hours of sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, then wake up when the doctors made their morning rounds. Soon I added more freelance gigs, transcription, data entry, virtual assistants, anything I could do from Liam's hospital room. "Mom, you look tired," Liam said one morning, his voice weak but his eyes concerned. "Maybe you should sleep at home tonight." I smiled, brushing his curls back from his forehead. "I'm right where I want to be, buddy.
Don't worry about me."
Days blurred together in an endless cycle of work, worry, and waiting. My back ached from the hospital chair. My eyes burned from staring at my laptop screen for 18 hours straight. But gradually the money in my savings account grew. Not fast enough, but it grew. Then, on a particularly bleak Tuesday, Dr. Martinez entered with an unexpected visitor, a woman in a navy blue suit. "Ms. Campbell, this is Elaine Wilson from the Children's Heart Foundation," Dr. Martinez said. "She'd like to speak with you." Hope fluttered cautiously in my chest as Ms. Wilson explained that their foundation had selected Liam as a recipient for their medical assistance program. They would cover 60% of his remaining costs. Combined with what I'd managed to save, we were finally within reach of the surgery. 2 weeks later, I stood trembling as they wheeled Liam toward the operating room. His small hand squeezed mine with surprising strength. "I'm not scared, Mom," he whispered. "I'm gonna be brave like you." The surgery lasted 9 excruciating hours. I paced the waiting room until my legs gave out, then collapsed into a chair, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged, his surgical mask hanging around his neck, I couldn't breathe until I saw his smile. He made it through. The surgery was successful. I slept by Liam's bed during his recovery, watching the color gradually return to his cheeks. One evening, as he slept peacefully for the first time in months, I opened my laptop out of habit, ready to begin another night of freelance work. Instead, I found myself researching something entirely different: low-cost medical diagnostic technologies. During Liam's treatment, I noticed how many families struggled with access to even basic medical equipment. In developing countries, the situation was even worse. An idea began forming. Vague at first, then increasingly clear. What if there was a way to create affordable versions of essential medical tools? Not cheap knockoffs, but innovative designs that serve the same purpose at a fraction of the cost? I started researching microfinancing, grants for healthcare innovations, and open-source medical technology. I made notes, drafted rough business plans, and reached out to contacts I'd made through my freelance medical writing. A month later, as Liam was finally discharged from the hospital, I looked at my son, alive, healing, with a future ahead of him, and something profound shifted inside me. I'd been powerless once, forced to beg for help from people who saw my child's life as less valuable than a dog's comfort. "Never again," I whispered to myself as we walked out of the hospital. "We'll never be at anyone's mercy again." That night, I registered the domain name for what would become my medical technology startup. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no parent would ever have to sell everything they owned to keep their child alive. Little did I know that this desperate, sleep-deprived idea would change everything. "You're wasting your time on that silly little project," my cousin Rachel said at the annual family Christmas gathering 6 months after Liam's surgery. I'd been invited out of obligation, not love, and had only attended so Liam could experience a proper family holiday. Sandra was absent, off on a skiing trip in Aspen with Duchess and her latest boyfriend, but her influence permeated the room. My relatives viewed my nascent startup with the same condescending amusement she would have shown. "It's not a project, it's a business," I corrected, watching Liam play with his second cousins across the room. "And we just secured our first angel investor last week." "How sweet," Aunt Meredith said with a patronizing smile. "Just be careful not to go into debt again." Not everyone has Sandra's financial cushion to fall back on when things go south. I bit my tongue and excused myself, reminding myself that their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was the prototype sitting in my apartment, a portable diagnostic device that could perform basic blood tests at 1/10 the cost of conventional equipment. For the next 18 months, I worked tirelessly. Days were split between a part-time nursing job to pay the bills and developing my medical startup. Nights were dedicated to Liam and research. I connected with Dr. Naveen Patel, a brilliant engineer who shared my vision of accessible healthcare technology, and together we refined our first product. They laughed at my silly startup, but they stopped laughing when Forbes called. The interview request came out of nowhere. A journalist had heard about our diagnostic kit through a healthcare conference and wanted to feature us in a piece about disruptive medical technologies. The article, titled Healthcare Revolution: The Single Mom Taking on Big Medical Tech, went viral within healthcare circles. Suddenly, investors weren't just listening, they were competing to be part of what we were building. Dr. Patel and I found ourselves in boardrooms with people who controlled millions in venture capital. Our portable diagnostic kit was just the beginning. We expanded to developing low-cost monitoring devices, telemedicine platforms for rural areas, and AI-assisted diagnostic tools that could work offline in regions with limited connectivity. 2 years after Liam's surgery, we received FDA approval for our flagship product. 3 months after that, we signed contracts with 5 international humanitarian organizations to deploy our technology in crisis zones. The World Health Organization invited me to speak on a panel about medical innovation for underserved populations. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages, partnership offers, and interview requests. Family members who had dismissed my little project now boasted about their connection to me. Rachel, who once suggested I focus on finding a rich husband instead of starting a business, sent a text asking if I was hiring. I hired her actually in the customer service department. She lasted 3 weeks before quitting, claiming the work was beneath her. On the 3rd anniversary of Liam's surgery, our company was valued at $40 million. I bought a house, not a mansion, but a beautiful, modern home with a yard where Liam could play and a dedicated office where I could work. It happened to be on Hillcrest Drive, the same exclusive neighborhood where Sandra had once told me I'd never afford to even visit. "Mom, are we rich now?" Liam asked as we moved in, his heart scar barely visible beneath his t-shirt. I knelt beside him, adjusting his collar. "We're comfortable, buddy. But more importantly, we're helping people who need it." He nodded seriously. "Like how the foundation helped us?" Exactly like that. That evening, as Liam slept in his new bedroom, I sat on our deck overlooking the city lights. My phone pinged with an email from our PR team. We'd been selected for the Innovators Under 40 list by a major business magazine. The accompanying photo shoot would take place next week. The same relatives who called me unstable suddenly started texting me sweet nothings. Cousins who'd ignored Liam's get-well cards now wanted playdates. Uncles who'd questioned my business acumen asked for investment advice. I responded politely, but maintained my distance. Because through it all, the late nights, the prototype failures, the meetings where men tried to explain my own technology to me, I never forgot who was there when I was at my worst, and who turned their back. The irony wasn't lost on me that our company's success came from creating affordable versions of the very medical equipment that might have saved us from needing to beg Sandra for help. Every time we received a testimonial from a parent whose child had been diagnosed early because of our technology, I thought of those dark days in the hospital. I didn't start this business for revenge. But as our company grew and my influence in the medical technology sector expanded, I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. The woman they had dismissed as irresponsible and naive was now being called a visionary. The single mother they had pitted was now being courted by the same social circles that had once excluded her. And through it all, I never once posted about Paris spas or designer dog collars. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office when Rachel called. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she'd quit the customer service position. "Have you heard? Aunt Sandra's brand collapsed." Her voice had that unmistakable tone of someone savoring gossip too delicious to keep private. It's all over the society pages. The news came with no surprise. I'd been peripherally aware of Sandra's business ventures through industry chatter and the occasional social media glimpse. 6 months after Liam's surgery, she'd launched Duchess Couture, a luxury dog accessories brand that she claimed would revolutionize pet fashion. The promotional photos featured Duchess, wearing diamond-studded collars and sleeping in miniature 4-poster beds. "What happened?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral even as something dark and satisfied unfurled in my chest. Everything, Rachel laughed. Absolutely everything. According to Rachel, Sandra had invested millions in launching the brand with arrogance, but no market research. She'd ignored consultants who suggested starting smaller, convinced that her social connections would guarantee success. She'd hired designers from top fashion houses at exorbitant salaries and insisted on using only the most expensive materials. The first sign of trouble came when several dogs developed severe allergic reactions to the imported Italian fabrics she'd used. Rather than addressing the issue, Sandra had dismissed the complaints as user error and blocked the pet owners on social media. The lawsuits followed swiftly. One dog nearly died, Rachel said. Can you imagine the irony? After what she did to you and Liam. I could, but chose not to verbalize it. Then came production issues. Her insistence on European manufacturing led to delays and quality control problems. Retailers began canceling orders. Celebrities who'd initially endorsed the brand quietly distanced themselves. The negative reviews piled up, and Sandra's unhinged responses only made things worse. She called a Vogue editor's poodle common-looking when they gave her collection a mediocre review. Rachel continued. Investors pulled out. The luxury department store that had agreed to carry her line relegated Duchess Couture to a back corner before discontinuing it entirely. Her social media empire, once filled with champagne brunches and private jet travel, had grown eerily quiet over the past few months. But here's the kicker. Rachel lowered her voice conspiratorially. Duchess is gone. What do you mean, gone? Sandra couldn't afford the specialty vet care anymore. Duchess developed some rare condition, karma if you ask me, and needed expensive treatment. She had to rehome her to some veterinarian who offered to take her in exchange for forgiving Sandra's massive bill. I thought of the $100,000 spa trip to Paris, of Sandra's words. I would never put Duchess in a position where I couldn't afford her medical care. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. There's more, Rachel continued. She sold the penthouse. She's been trying to crash with family members. She stayed with Uncle Robert for 2 weeks until his wife put her foot down. Nobody wants her. She's been blacklisted from the country club for not paying dues, and rumor has it she's been spotted driving a Honda. She whispered the car brand like it was an obscenity. I ended the call soon after, unsure how to process this information. 5 years had passed since I'd begged Sandra for help to save my son's life. 5 years of building something meaningful while she'd apparently been dismantling everything she had. That evening, as Liam and I ate dinner on our patio, I found myself thinking about Sandra. Not with satisfaction, as I might have once expected, but with a strange hollowness. The revenge fantasy I'd occasionally indulged in during those dark hospital nights hadn't played out as imagined. There was no triumphant confrontation, no moment of reckoning where I threw her coldness back in her face. Instead, she'd simply faded, become irrelevant. While I'd been focused on creating something that helped people, she'd been consumed by appearances until there was nothing substantial left. Mom, you're quiet tonight, Liam said, now a healthy 11-year-old with his father's curious mind and none of the health problems that had once threatened his life. Just thinking about work, I smiled, pushing thoughts of Sandra aside. The next morning, I arrived at the office early to prepare for an important presentation. My company had developed a new diagnostic tool for detecting heart defects in infants, technology that might have identified Liam's condition before it became critical. We were hoping to partner with a major hospital chain to make it standard in all their facilities. I was reviewing my slides when my assistant knocked on my door. There's someone here to see you, she said, looking uncomfortable. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insisting it's urgent. Says she's your aunt. The world seemed to pause for a moment as the implication sank in. How does she look? I asked, surprising myself with the question. My assistant hesitated. Honestly, desperate. I took a deep breath, straightened my blazer, and nodded. Send her in. The door opened, and there she stood. No designer coat. No perfectly coiffed hair. Just a desperate look and trembling hands. Sandra, the woman who once had everything and gave nothing, had come to me. Sandra stepped into my office, and I barely recognized her. The imperious woman who once lounged in designer clothes while dismissing my pleas for help was gone. In her place stood someone with hollow cheeks and dull eyes, wearing a blouse that had seen better days. Her hair, once professionally colored and styled weekly, showed gray roots and split ends. Yet somehow, she still smelled like expensive perfume, her last connection to the life she'd lost. "Jennifer," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, I'd sat across from her, clutching medical documents and begging for help. "What can I do for you, Sandra?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the wall, the view of the city, the evidence of success she'd once been certain I'd never achieve. Her eyes lingered on a framed photo of Liam in his soccer uniform, healthy and strong. "He looks good," she said quietly. "I'm glad." "Yes, he is. No thanks to you." The words slipped out before I could stop them. She flinched but didn't argue. I deserve that. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see my employees moving purposefully, working on technologies that would help people like Liam. I'd built something real here, something that mattered. "Please, I need a job. I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. And for a moment, I almost pitied her. "A job," I repeated flatly. "Here, at my company." She nodded, her eyes fixed on her hands. "I've lost everything, Jennifer. The business, the penthouse, my savings, even Duchess." Her voice broke on the dog's name in a way it never had when speaking of Liam. "What happened to all your friends? The social circle you were so proud of?" Her laugh was bitter. "They disappeared the moment my credit cards were declined. I tried staying with your cousin Rachel, but she threw me out after 3 days. Said I was bringing negative energy into her home." I wasn't surprised. Rachel had always been Sandra's mini-me, equally shallow and status-obsessed. Now that Sandra had nothing to offer, she was disposable. "And what skills would you bring to my company?" I asked, genuinely curious how she'd answer. I have extensive experience managing people. I ran my own business, which failed spectacularly," I pointed out. "And from what I understand, your management style involved berating employees until they quit." She had no response to that. "What about your contacts? Surely you must know potential investors or clients we could approach." Sandra's face crumpled. "They won't take my calls anymore. I'm a cautionary tale in those circles now." I studied the woman across from me, this shell of the ant who had terrified and intimidated me for most of my life. I'd fantasized about this moment during those sleepless nights in the hospital. Imagine the satisfaction of turning her away just as cruelly as she dismissed Liam's life. But looking at her now, I felt none of the triumph I'd expected. Just a hollow sadness for what could have been if she'd made different choices. "Why should I help you?" I asked simply. "Give me one good reason." "Because we're family," she tried weakly. "That didn't matter to you when my son was dying," I reminded her. "Because I'm desperate." Her composure finally broke. "Because I'm 60 years old with no skills, no money, and nowhere to live. Because last night, I slept in my car and washed up in a gas station bathroom." Tears spilled down her cheeks, carving paths through her makeup. "Because you're the only person I know who might be human enough to help me despite everything I've done." The irony of her appeal to my humanity, when she had shown none when I needed it most, wasn't lost on me. I sat across from her in the office I built from scratch, remembering how she laughed when I said I had a vision. I remembered the humiliation of begging her for help, the pain of her rejection, and the terror of almost losing my son. I didn't lash out. I didn't yell. I simply said, "You once said I was irresponsible. Would you trust someone like me with your future?" She broke down crying, ugly, heaving sobs that sent my assistant hurrying over with a concerned look. I waved her away. When Sandra finally composed herself, wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue, I'd made my decision. "We have an opening for a receptionist," I said calmly. The hours are 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. The pay is fair but not extravagant. There's health insurance after 3 months. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You're offering me a job? As a receptionist? It's honest work, I said. More than you were willing to offer my son. The barb hit its mark, and she flinched again. But then slowly she nodded. When can I start? Tomorrow, I said, standing to signal our meeting was over. And Sandra? Don't be late. As I walked her to the door, she turned to me with a question in her eyes.
Why?
Why would you help me after what I did? I considered my answer carefully. Because proving you wrong about me is worth more than making you suffer. And because I want you to see, up close, exactly what you missed out on when you turned your back on family. 6 months passed. Sandra adapted to her new role with surprising resilience. The woman who once refused to carry her own shopping bags now answered phones, scheduled appointments, and filed paperwork without complaint. She's now my receptionist. And yes, I pay her fairly, but not a penny more than she earns. On her first day, she arrived 30 minutes early, wearing clothes that I recognized as expensive but dated, relics from her former life. Her hands trembled as she learned the phone system, and she flinched whenever someone addressed her directly, as if expecting mockery or disdain. But no one mocked her. I'd been clear with my staff. Sandra was to be treated with the same respect as any other employee. Not because she deserved it, but because that's the culture we'd built. We were better than the world she came from. She lived in a small studio apartment now, one I'd helped her find within walking distance of the office. It wasn't charity. She paid her own rent from her salary, but I'd co-sign the lease when her credit score proved too damaged for approval. A small kindness that seemed to humble her more than any revenge could have. You have a call from Dr. Emerson about the cardiac prototype, Sandra announced through the intercom one morning, her voice still carrying traces of the refined accent she'd cultivated over decades of social climbing. Thank you, Sandra, I replied, the formality between us never quite dissolving. We were neither enemies nor friends, just two women connected by blood and a history too complicated to untangle. I didn't do it to humiliate her. I did it to show her what humility looks like. The first time she witnessed me donate a shipment of our diagnostic equipment to a struggling rural clinic, confusion crossed her face. When I explained that we provided our technology at cost to certain facilities, she seemed genuinely baffled. But how do you profit from that? She asked. Not everything is about profit, Sandra, I replied. Sometimes it's about making sure another parent doesn't have to watch their child suffer because they can't afford basic medical care. She answered phones, booked appointments, and watched as I led meetings with international investors. The woman who once sneered at my naive business plans now took notes during strategy sessions where we discussed expanding into markets she'd only visited as a tourist. Sometimes I caught her staring at the life she once said I'd never have. Not with envy, exactly, but with a dawning recognition of what she could have been part of if she'd made different choices. If she'd seen her great-nephew as family rather than an inconvenience. If she'd valued connection over status. One evening, working late, I found her studying a photo of Liam that sat on my desk, him grinning beside the science project that had won the school fair, his once defective heart now strong enough to let him run and play like any other child. He has your smile, she said softly, not realizing I was there. And my stubbornness, I added, making her jump. It's what kept him fighting. She nodded, placed the frame carefully back on my desk. I should have helped, she said simply. I will regret that until the day I die. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever offered. I didn't accept it outright. Some wounds run too deep for easy forgiveness, but I acknowledged it with a nod. The company continued to grow. We developed new technologies, expanded into new markets, saved more lives. Sandra witnessed it all from her front desk position, processing the contracts and scheduling the meetings that built an empire she could have been part of from the beginning. The day we received FDA approval for our pediatric cardiac screening device, technology that would identify conditions like Liam's before they became life-threatening, I called him at school to share the news. That's awesome, Mom, he exclaimed. Can I tell my science teacher? We're studying medical inventions this semester. Of course, I smiled, tears pricking my eyes as I remembered how close I'd come to losing him. As I hung up, I noticed Sandra standing in my doorway with a contract that needed signing. "That's the cardiac device?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded. "The one that could have detected his condition early?"
Yes.
"It'll be in every major pediatric center by next year." She handed me the contract, her fingers lingering on the paper. "You did it," she said quietly. "You changed the world because of him." "Not just because of him," I corrected her. "Because of what happened to us. All of us. And my son? He's healthy, thriving, and knows exactly how hard his mom fought for him. He knows the value of persistence, the power of vision, and the importance of helping others. What he doesn't know, what I've never told him, is how his great-aunt once deemed his life less valuable than a dog's comfort. Some truths serve no purpose. As for Aunt Sandra, she still smells like expensive perfume, but she's no longer the one giving orders. She's learning, slowly, that real worth isn't measured in designer labels or social connections. Because karma doesn't need to shout. It just waits patiently, then watches you walk through the doors you were once locked out of. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it brings you along to witness what could have been yours all along: family, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of making the world better instead of just more impressive.